Okay, we are now live, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the show. My name is Dale Hutchinson. I am with Leslie Peterson, or Peters, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Call me whatever.
Reverend Peters, RN. And today we have Phyllis Leavitt with us. And welcome to the show. This is live. And I will be publishing it, putting it on the internet later this week, sometimes as I can get to it. Anyway, welcome. Let's get started. Tell us about yourself, Phyllis.
Well, thank you so much for having me here. I am an author and a psychotherapist. I've been a psychotherapist for well over 30 years. And I just wrote a book called America in Therapy, A New Approach to Hope and Healing for a Nation in Crisis. And the point of that book is to try to bring the healing we know possible in good psychotherapy to our country.
So let me ask you a question for people out there. What's the difference between psychotherapy and regular therapy, like talk therapy?
I don't know if there is a difference. I mean, psychotherapy can include many different modalities. It could be talk therapy. It can include like inner child work and hypnosis. I don't know if you're familiar with EMDR, but that's a great practice in psychotherapy. There's just many, many different modalities, but I call them all psychotherapy because most people that I know with all the training that they've done over the years kind of put a lot of those different modalities together in their own unique style of working with people.
Yeah, I did when I was just a counselor, but I used a lot of different, I didn't use EMDR, I wasn't trained, but boy, I sure love it.
Yeah.
It's a great modality.
And I know everyone's different and different things work, but do you find one that consistently yields good results, positive results, one therapy or the other?
I found that EMDR and combining that with inner child work was a very powerful way of working. Sometimes I used guided visualization depending on, what was needed in the session. But I would just say that the model of family systems, how we're affected by other people, what our conditioning is, what we've come to believe about ourselves, and the behaviors and coping mechanisms that we develop out of our conditioning is sort of a model no matter what approach you're taking, looking at how we, what our early formative experiences were and how they've left us in a place where we're stuck or in pain or need help. Yeah. That's overarching, I guess I would say.
And EMDR, it was funny. I think Dale and I have spoken about this before. I had a lazy eye growing up because I spent a lot of time over the last 5 or 6 years trying to figure out exactly how I managed to escape adversity and trauma, not seeing it as a curse, not hanging on to anger, not like just emotionally healing without knowing I need to heal, right? But one of the things I did when EMDR came out, these things, lazy eye exercises, I'm like, oh my gosh, like rudimentary, very primitive EMDR.
Mm-hmm.
So, in times when I uncovered that, in times when I do get anxious, I go back to my eye exercise.
Fantastic. Yeah, because I guess it's now scientifically shown to actually change the way we're processing information between the two hemispheres of our brain.
Yeah.
That's part of the biological piece of the healing process, which is very powerful.
It is. Another thing I did too is from an early age, I breathe differently. And as a nurse, I never really was aware that I was breathing differently until I got trained to do Reiki, and they were trying to teach me to breathe. And actually, it's before that was meditation training. Mm-hmm. But when I breathed, I held my abs tight. I didn't suck them in, but I kind of constricted them both on inhale and exhale. And the science I learned behind that was, and then I also crossed my eyes when I got up between my eyes. Didn't know why I was doing it, but it was the same idea as bringing the left and right hemisphere together. And it was kind of crazy the way innately our body, if we're allowed, no one squelches us, right, to do these things innately, the body knows what to do.
Right.
It's when, it's when the outside world and our minds get in the way of what.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, sort of as a add-on to what you just said, that I think the same thing is true for our psyches, that we do know what we need on an emotional, mental level if we're allowed to access that. If we're not in a system around us, an environment or a family system around us that is hurting us or threatening us or making it impossible in some other way to access our own deep knowing for ourselves. And that's one of the sad parts of abuse or neglect or dysfunction in families, is that people get cut off from their own best intuitive sense of what they need to survive well.
Well, that's, and I don't even think you need trauma for that. It's the armor we wear. You know what I mean? Whenever we lose touch with ourselves, even if it's through hiding, we don't, just normal everyday wanting to fit in and belong. So squelching a part of ourselves
Right.
to do that. Anyhow, sorry. So much for not talking, Dale, huh?
Yeah. I was going to make that comment. That's all right. We're getting some good information. I just had a quick question. You told us why you wrote the book, America in Therapy, but I was curious, what makes you think that America is in mental health crisis?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's actually the motivation for my book. And I would just say that to the extent that we're fast, moving towards so much divisiveness, so much conflict, so many threats of violence, so many mass murders, so much really overt discrimination and injustice and lack of equal opportunity in America. And again, I always say that's not to say that's the whole truth. There are many wonderful things going on in America, and there's many wonderful, loving, kind, just people in America. But institutionally, there's a lot of movement toward divisiveness and violence. And I think we're being programmed to believe that those are ideological issues when in fact they're mental health issues. And the reason why I say this is because mentally healthy people don't target other people for abuse and neglect. They take responsibility for themselves and their part in an interaction, and they examine their own motives and their own behaviors. Are they loving? Are they kind? Are they cooperative? Do they value everyone's human life? And in dysfunctional families and with dysfunctional and abusive people, you find huge power differentials. You find targeting of people and blaming them for the abuse that's heaped on them, and then blaming them for their symptoms of the abuse. In dysfunctional and abusive families, those in power who are hurting other people often silence the truth tellers, discredit them, target them further, enroll other people to target them, and convince other people that they're the bad one or they deserve what's happening to them. And we see exactly the same dynamics happening in what I call the family of America, coming from the top down and the bottom up. And I don't know your experience, Leslie, as a therapist, but mine is that even with people who look, the population I have worked with over the years is just people like you and me. It's people are really suffering from the dysfunction that they grew up with. They're really suffering from feeling stuck in unconsciously repeating the patterns of what hurt them in the first place. And they bring a lot of pain to the therapy process. And I had that same experience myself, where fortunately I was able to find safe people to process what had happened to me. And we need that in America. We need to create the safety that people can actually process their pain and be safe so that they don't keep repeating their own dysfunctional patterns that they've come by honestly because they were hurt.
Yeah. And you know what? I'm not a therapist. I'm a registered nurse, but I did specialize in women and trauma. But, it's funny. The last 5 or 6 years, I had some health issues that put me on the other end of healthcare. And I dealt a lot with the Department of DHS and our just doctors and the health system in general. I was sexually abused from the time I was 12 and then gaslighted like every adult, father, like a lot of us. It carried on. And the past 5 or 6 years working in the system as a patient have been more disempowering than any of the abuse I faced.
Wow. And so that's really abuse from a larger system. It's still abuse. And I think a lot of people are suffering from that.
I don't think it's intentional. And Don, my frustration has been that my whole life I've dealt with women in trauma. And so given a safe space, they appreciate and are inspired by authenticity. Because I came out like with my message was it was easy to create a safe space, be authentic. And for 7 years, I've been faced with people in the system who aren't authentic. And so I don't create a safe space for them because I'm a mirror for their truth that they're not allowing themselves to be in. And I'm just looking, going, oh my God, the problem is not the people in trauma. Pain isn't a problem. Abuse isn't a problem if you're willing to look at it and acknowledge and accept it.
Right.
The problem that becomes societal is when we start hiding from our pain and we go, no, that's not me. And the twofold is I saw how healthcare workers, mental health, people in the system, cops, whoever had trauma, right?
Right.
Dealing with someone with a similar childhood experience or background and you're denying your own, you cannot be genuinely empathetic and compassionate.
Right. Because you're projecting your own unhealed wounds onto other people. But if you
don't know you're projecting it, like nurses, we know deep down we have a big heart. But when our actions and our words towards others don't reflect who we believe we are, then you've got the internal conflict. So I look at the world objectively now and go, it's like one big messed up family with addiction. You got all these people who really can't trust themselves because we never had that opportunity in childhood to develop a solid sense of self. And so when, the coping mechanisms, right? When people feel scared, feel unsafe, they hang on trying to control. And you can control by controlling others, or you can control by giving and finding your value in that. And I just look and go, oh my God, it's so simple yet so complicated.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it all starts with the family, and communication. Think if you could say to your parents, that really hurt me that you said that. I think Dale and I've discussed, I wasn't much of a yeller, but I did yell once because I'd worked night shift. And luckily my son was able to say, you hurt my feelings. You never yelled. So I could say to him, I'm so sorry. And I'm not saying about you. I had a really hard night, but and that's the kind of thing families need, but there's still this power. I don't know,
I think it's the same thing in our country. And that's why I sort of use the model of the family to talk about the country, because what you said is so important. If we could, as a country, as leaders, as the leaders of different parts of the institutions that make policy and enact policy and make laws, if we could reflect on ourselves and see if what we're doing is hurting people or helping them, or who it's hurting and who it's helping, and take accountability for our impact on other people and say, you know what, we made a mistake. What we just did was wrong and it really hurt people, and we're willing to make amends and we're willing to do something differently now, which is what the best therapy helps people do in their own lives, right?
And you look at every social problem, whether it be homelessness, racism, it all stems from one thing. The person who holds that judgment is not comfortable and does not feel safe with themselves.
Right.
Right.
It's the perpetuation of all our unhealed wounds. And for some people, it comes out as passivity, and they're easily controlled because they were dominated and subdued by the dynamics in their dysfunctional families. or it comes out as what we call, and probably know this term, identification with the aggressor. And those are the people who act out the same kinds of aggressive behaviors and attitudes toward other people that were heaped on them. And those two configurations of passivity or learned helplessness and identification with the aggressor fit together like a hand in a glove.
Yeah, it's the toxic dance. I mean, it's a perfect duo.
Exactly. And we're seeing that on governmental levels as well as in families. And so for me, the idea was to address it on all levels so that we can just see that this is the dance of human behavior when we're not aware of what we're doing, when we've been hurt and we haven't had a chance to heal, and when we're not allowed to comment on the ways that we're hurt and given a chance to heal.
And Dale, I want to say one thing, then please, I don't want us to monopolize here, but when I came out and I started talking to healthcare systems and mental health about this, like, it was like talking to a brick wall, because nobody wants to think they're the problem. And my point is that I'm sure the intentions are pure, the majority, and it's not your fault if you developed a coping mechanism as a child.
Right.
There is no blame. Take the blame away. There is no blame. We did the same way our parents, for the most part, did the best they could with what. As children, we did the best we could. We developed mechanisms that just so happen to not work great in adults, because we all have those, and it's just like, it's a bunch of 5-year-olds running around, including myself, when I.
Right. When you lose it, right? Or when you're triggered.
Go ahead,
too.
I'm going to bend down because I dropped something. So if you see me disappear. Dale, please.
Yeah. Do you know the correlation between addiction of any kind and mental health disease?
Well, there's probably not one correlation, but one of the things that I would say is that part of addiction anyway, and you probably want to speak to an addiction specialist, which I'm not, part of addiction, many of the treatment centers for addiction are called dual diagnosis treatment centers. And that means they're treating the actual addiction to alcohol or drugs or whatever the addiction is, and an underlying emotional issue. Another diagnosis, depression, anxiety, trauma. So they often go together. And I know I worked in a sexual abuse treatment program for a couple of years when I first started my career. And we had someone come in from one of the treatment centers and talk with us. And she said that more than half of the people that they treated for were dual diagnosis for addiction of some kind. More than half had abuse or neglect in their childhood. And so there is a strong correlation between unhealed emotional, physical, sexual violation and our wounds and addiction, because people are trying to medicate the pain away. Well, and I think what you said is a good point, is that we're doing the best we can with what we have, but sometimes what we have, like reaching for a drink or gambling your money away or being addicted to drugs, creates more problems than it solves. And then you have layers of symptomology that need to be peeled back.
Well, I am an addiction specialist. I spent 24 years.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
And I also wrote and facilitated a dual diagnosis group.
Okay. And you know better than me. Go ahead.
So I was just curious what your point of the view was, because we went on the theory that about 80 to 90% of everyone who has has an addiction has a mental health issue.
I wouldn't argue with that at all.
Well, that's where I came up with over the past. So I uncovered from myself back in 2018, when I started using the computer, that I had an old traumatic brain injury. Right? Left a lot of learning challenges. But I also saw how every part of my traumatic brain injury were the gifts that allowed me to be vulnerable and to connect at an authentic level with people. And the emotional intimacy, albeit with strangers, is what allowed me to never feel alone in the world and unsupported, even though in reality I was. But what I'm seeing is that I'm calling like a neurodivinity of trauma. We know from the ACEs study that when a child doesn't feel safe chronically on a daily basis, whether it's emotional and physical safety, real or perceived, that the constant triggering of fight, flight, or freeze does cause the brain to develop differently. And that's where Philadelphia, and we saw the drugs and addiction just like skyrocket. There was a period, I said to some of my contacts in the system, are we looking at the years before it? Like, I was curious to tie in with the years we took arts out of the school, because if you have neurodiversity, it's very difficult when your brain works in a different way that the world does, and the world doesn't understand the way your brain works, because there's a lot of labeling. You're lazy, you're this, you're this, you're this. And it's not just your brain works differently, right? It's more right side driven. And so I often wondered, are people numbing just because no one understands their brain, including themselves? When I understood myself more, I never thought my brain was an issue, but I'm having issues now in a tech world, the way my brain works. And it is... I'm wondering how much of the neurodiversity is causing a lot of these issues. And so my own personal belief is that I think much of what we call mental health, anxiety, depression, is more of emotional wellness due to cognitive health. We mental health is a nice label we throw on everything. But I think the problem, us systems as a whole, is we look for the easy answer and the short-term fix.
Yeah.
And all these have multiple, it's not just one thing, right? But like in addiction, at least as of like 5-6 years ago, when I was doing research, the triad for addiction, one of the things, hypotheses, is that there's an underdeveloped cognitive brain. Well, that's what ACEs does.
Right.
So I just think if we being the systems truly want to solve a lot of these issues, we're going to need to roll our sleeves up, get in, get messy, get dirty, and be okay with what we find out about ourselves without judgment.
Well, I think that's really critical, because one of the things that I think really good therapy does is make it safe, not only to talk about the things that happen to us that were hurtful or harmful from other people, but to talk about who we've been. None of us is exempt from having hurt somebody or done something that we regret. And we need to be safe to explore where that came from, why we projected what we projected or acted the way we did, not from a sense of blame and shame, but, it had its origins in what I learned in my family, or what was modeled to me on the playground, or wherever it came from. And I can be accountable for that and take responsibility for myself and change my behavior. And that's what, a big thing that I want to see happen on a much broader societal level, on a community level, a state level, a national level, and even an international level, that we can be accountable without shame for the things that we've done that have not been good, that have really hurt other people. And if you, and I think it's very few and far between for most of us, that we've actually had people in our lives that have come to us and said, I'm really sorry for what I said or what I did, and it was wrong, or I know that I hurt you. I think it's very hard for us as human beings to acknowledge our own part in something, and it's critical to all of our healing. And what if we could celebrate that instead of shame and blame each other?
Well, and look, I have, over the past 7 years, from not only healthcare professionals, mental health, but just from people who are everyday people, middle class, that, when I started reaching out and telling people about my brain injury, like, I was amazing. I have 2 college degrees, finished top of my class, and my reading comprehension's at first grade level. But all I heard for 7 years is, you're just telling yourself this. You're just telling yourself you can change it. Not one person. And that was the first grade tutor I hired, right? Because I figured if I first grade education. I'm like, but she was the only person that said, you know, you're amazing what you've done. Nobody validated that. And in that lesson of nobody validating my successes, and, you know, I realized what it was of value that I did for my clients. And that was, I validated. I said,
yeah,
this sucks. You should never have to experience this. But since you have, how can we look at it differently? Because once we validate for people what they're going through, it's very difficult to let it go, because you're wanting validation. You're wanting to someone say, and there's no shame in that. You know, when you're struggling, for someone to struggle.
And just as much as we need that for ourselves, other people need it from us.
Yeah.
Like you're saying, I think that's,
most people can't do it to themselves.
right.
That's where everything stems from. If we can't validate ourselves and say, wow, this really sucks. This doesn't.
Well, I think that one of the things you learned by your own experience, and I did too from my experience, is you just learn a different level of compassion. You know what it's like to suffer from whatever has happened to you. You know what it's like to suffer from the judgment you've put on yourself. You know what it's like to suffer from the judgment you receive from other people. And you can become a safe island, you know, in the storm for other people, because you're not going to repeat that pattern. And I think the more we offer really safe harbor for each other to process their pain and process their own participation in whatever didn't work in their life, the more we become that for one another. You don't have to be a therapist to do that for another human being.
Yeah, Dale and I've talked before, and you know, when I came out, business coaches are like, "How do you help people?" I'm like, I don't help people. Like, you're a nurse for 30. How do you help? I say, I don't help. I hold.
Yes, love that. I love that.
Because helping says, I'm up here, I have an answer, you don't.
Right.
And once you pull that ego into it, like, I know when you're a child and like you're with unhealthy parents and whatever, you always feel like everything's your fault. So why do I want someone to feel like they're at fault again? I never want that. Like, I want to empower people, not make them feel worse about
so if I can just say this quickly, and then Dale, please come back in. What if our largest institutions operated on that same understanding, that they wanted to empower people, everyone, to be their best self, to be their essential goodness, to be their greatest gifts? We would have a different world.
Well, and that's why I created the HEART model, this multi-phase oneness initiative, to teach all of us at the same time, right? Because like for us to say to anyone, be authentic. Well, that's really scary when you haven't been and no one else is, right?
Right.
So
you don't know.
Yeah, I created this model, but I've been taking systems. No one wants to hear it, because like I think they know it's partly their fault. And so it's a matter of now, I think maybe the route is just getting the people together. I don't want to fix it.
About what the cost is, for one thing, of not doing this, of not growing our compassion, of not growing our understanding about our wounds and how they manifest if we don't get help and we don't get rescue and we don't get some kind of safe harbor to reprocess ourselves. That the cost is what we're seeing. Escalating mass, murders and horrible divisiveness and name calling and, what do they call it? Misinformation, coming down from the top that's just flooding over all of us. These are mental health issues. They're not ideological issues. And that's one of my biggest arguments here, because mentally healthy people don't do these things.
Right. I agree with you. What I was going to say is, over the years, I had several sex crimes perpetrators in my groups. And the thing that it was a reoccurring theme among all of them, from the ones that were really horrendous, very bad perpetrators, to the guy that downloaded a few pictures on the internet with child pornography. And really, that's all he did. But that still hurts people. I'm not saying that. But the thing that I got most from most of them, moral. They all had the same story. I did my time. I went to prison. I was on probation for X number of years. I had to attend group therapy for so many years and all this other stuff that they end up having to do. But the thing that's worried them the most was that registry, sex crimes registry,
Yeah.
because it keeps you in the shame and it keeps you in the guilt. And that's the way I look at it.
Well, and it
It keeps
keeps
you
you
in fear.
walk away. If you're healed, you made a mistake that will follow you for the rest of your life.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I see both ends of it, but there has to be a better solution. But I think if we're talking systems and we're talking a we, right? You know, in order to feel safe in the oneness of we have to learn to feel safe as one with me first.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the only way that I learn to go anywhere and feel safe anywhere. Because I trust my intuition. I trust my gut to go, yeah, get out. You're not safe. You know, and that way I don't have to go into my head and think about it. I listen to my body and what my body's telling me.
Yeah, that's good.
The second thing is, so looking at the world's end, all the things they're having, we have to be realistic. And I've never been a cynic, but we have to be realistic. Do they want to fix the problems? Or is this separation, separating the masses even more than we were, part of some greater, I don't want to say word conspiracy, but some greater global plan of leaders? You know what I'm saying? Even things like digital dollar, it seems like decisions that are being made in many different countries are being made to take away choice and power from people.
Mm-hmm.
And the best way to do that is to separate people, right? And make them feel like that's the narcissist thing, right? Because it depends who we want to talk to. If it is truly the leaders, not all leaders, but if it is some select group of leaders who don't want things to change, then obviously we can't go that route to try to change the culture.
Well, I think the best, you know, there may be no one answer. And I think many people's expertise probably would be just wonderful if there could be a forum for people, you know, who are experts in economics and social justice and religion and, you know, male female issues and all the different issues that we're working with to come together and put their heads together. But from a psychological point of view, I would just say that what you're talking about are mental health issues. When one person or one group of people seeks to dominate other people with no regard for the impact they're having on them, and they've lost connection to their own humanity to such an extent that they're willing to hurt other people to get their perceived needs met, then we have a mental health crisis. And I think one of the approaches that is my approach, since my world is psychotherapy, is to inform people. You know, this is just like in the medical world. Before we knew that germs and bacteria and viruses cause disease, we were looking for all kinds of cures that didn't cure things because we didn't know what caused those illnesses. And once we could identify the bacteria that caused a certain plague or whatever it was, we had a way to begin to treat it. And it's the same with our psyches. If more people are informed about what ill mental health, and abuse and dysfunctional family dynamics are doing to us on a mass scale, the more hope there is that we can start to empower leadership that embodies healthy human dynamics.
Yeah,
Should there be some type of litmus test for political candidates on their mental status? So,
go ahead.
No, I was going to say, sort of. I still think we need to differentiate true mental health versus emotional wellness. And I mean, they are tied in, but you stem it differently, even situational stuff, right? Like if someone, for example, I used to be an OB, well, we'd have to do the test, the depression test scale, right? 3 days ago, the woman lost a baby. Like, do you really think her mental health at that moment is going to be stellar. But she gets sucked into the system because her score is high because of this situational thing, right? Like I don't think you can litmus test. That's why I don't like evidence-based studies on human behavior, because most people, it changes minute to minute. Their emotional status, which affects the mental health. When we're talking anxiety,
Emotions.
not when we're talking schizophrenia, not when we're talking major and chemical issues, but when we're just talking general anxiety and depression that are non-chemical based, I don't think it's as cut and dry is, oh, you have anxiety, boom. Do you have anxiety because you're on the computer so much? And even just the visual aspect of sensory overwhelm is creating, you know what I mean? Like there are too many factors to have a litmus test. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah. Well, all emotions are fluid.
Say that again?
Our emotional state being, we're emotional beings, but our emotions are fluid.
Are they what? Are they what?
Fluid, liquid.
Fluid. Yeah.
Fluid.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying, right, Leslie? That they're so liquid that they change.
Yes. And
I agree with that.
One of the reasons I was trying to get community conversations together and hold a safe space is because, like, we all well know, shifting perception is amazing and you have to do it. That's how I got through my life, is shifting perception. But before you shift perception, you have to talk about the reality of what your perception is. So if something feels crappy, you got give people permission to say, I'm angry. You got to release the emotion. Otherwise it ends up stuck in our bodies as stagnant energy. And, but you got to take that first step. When I went to systems to say, let's do this, I'd hear, we do that already. And I'm like, all right, well, it's not working, whatever we're doing. So whatever we're doing, throw the bathwater out with the baby. Let's start from scratch, when you had talked about getting experts, I'm seeing now, I don't think it's experts we need. I think when I worked in public health, you'd have a group of different races, but middle-class people deciding what poor people needed. I said, why don't we ask them? Well, no, we'll just do what we did last year. Well, it didn't work. Like, it's easier. That's why, you want to figure out how to help predators, child pornography, go to child pornographers. Ask them what they need. Don't ask the experts who haven't experienced it. I think we put too much emphasis on experts who have education, but they may have knowledge, but not the wisdom of experience. If you want to know how to help narcissists, go talk to narcissists. Ask them what they would need. And I think that's one of our first system problems, is we don't ask the people we're trying to help. We try to help with solutions that would help them live their lives more like we live ours. Like, we provide solutions for people based on how we live our lives to bring them to live a lifestyle like we have. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense to me. I think I wasn't talking about bringing experts together in that way of eliminating conversation.
Yeah,
I think what we're missing is conversation. I think what we're missing is dialogue between all kinds of groups of people, where it's safe to disagree, where different ideas can come to the table, whether it's in a family or a couple or a community or in our country. So yeah, I think.
So how do I get those started? I mean, because that's why I left work, to be honest with you, because I would have these conversations and I didn't even do much talking, believe it or not, but I would ask welfare the women and their friends. I'd pull them one-on-one, ask them open-ended questions. And within 6 months, 30% of the numbers I'd studied had pulled themselves either off welfare, written books. And when I called and said, let me know what you did so I can share with my other clients. And they're like, it was that conversation. I said, that conversation, that was it. Somebody listened to them. They felt safe. And as they spoke, they perceive themselves differently. And once they could perceive themselves differently, their whole perception of everyone around them and world shifted. It was that simple, 2 hours in a conversation.
I think that's fabulous. And I think that's what the best therapy and the best friendship and the best partnership and the best parenting and the best teaching all do, you know, is that we actually see each other as worthy. We see each other as having something worthwhile that needs to be heard or processed or shared. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that's magnificent.
So here's where I do.
Go
ahead, Del. I'm sorry. You go.
You've met him, Dr. Diggs. That's what makes him so successful, is what you're talking about. I was his patient I'm still his patient. It's been 2015 since we've been together. It's been a long time with Dr. Diggs. And that's what he does. He has a conversation with you and lets you tell what your story is. And you feel safe doing it. And that's what makes him so effective.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you met him when we had him on the show.
You know, and I did when I left. There were a couple universities in Philadelphia that wanted to back me, but their goal was to show how different welfare moms were than and I went, no, that's not my point. My point is to show that I've talked to a diverse palette of people my whole life, from homeless to celebrities. And when you talk about issues of the human condition, we're so damn similar. If you had your eyes closed, you wouldn't know who you were talking to, because
Right.
The psyche is the psyche. You know?
Yeah, I got one question here that I think is what we've been talking about here. Needs to come up, and that's, what is the new understanding of victims and perpetrators that we need, Phyllis?
Yeah, well, you know, because I've worked so much in that field, you know, this is my understanding that victims and perpetrators are generally both victims. Someone doesn't become a perpetrator for no reason. They're not born a rapist or a killer. Something happens to people that disconnects them from their own sense of their own humanity, their own worth, and the sense of humanity and worth of other people. And they really lose that connection. And that's part of what allows people to hurt other people with no remorse and in their inability to take in the pain that they're causing. But it stems from some kind of victimization or very unhealthy conditioning. And so if we're really going to seriously try to address stopping the cycle of abuse, whether it's in a family or in a community or in a country or in the world, we have to look for the victim inside the perpetrator and treat that the best we can, even if the person, we don't know how to make them safe for society. We have a terribly, terribly deficient criminal justice system, which just
Yes.
is so willing and able to just vilify people and call them horrible human beings, instead of really looking at what happened to them. And again, whether we know how to bring them safely back into society or not, they're still human beings. And there's many studies that have been done within prisons where, and I've seen some documentaries where they've talked to people who, you know, are in there for murder and terrible crimes, and their childhoods are so traumatic and so tragic that, you know, we have to make that link. We just have to make that link and offer people treatment as much as possible and actually see them as human beings. And quoting Brian Stevenson, who works in the criminal justice system, he said, "No one is the worst thing they've ever done." Yeah. And I would also add to that, no one is the worst thing that's ever happened to them, because they go together. Yeah. We're not that. We're an essential self underneath all the layers of terrible conditioning that we might have received. And I want to tell you a quick story. I had met this person he worked for an insurance company, and he worked for the mental health department of the insurance company. And I said, very naively, I said to him, "I really love my clients." And he said to me, "Yeah, that's the problem. That's the problem with master's level therapists. They love their clients too much," meaning you keep people in therapy when they don't need it. He was a numbers cruncher. So, he's crunch the numbers down to the least, possible expense that the insurance company could have for mental health. And I thought, this is so sad. The bottom line is, if you actually don't care about people, what help are you going to give them? All of our wounds come from the ways that we weren't loved well or loved at all. And there are many people who never experienced feeling loved, and they're highly symptomatic. So if we don't bring, and I'm not talking about bad boundaries, I'm talking about if we don't bring care and love to the healing process or whatever it is we feel like we have to offer. I mean, I don't think
what my clients told me when I called, and I said, listen, because I was trying to figure out, I had a very hard time labeling what I did, because a university in Philly, Jacksonville, had said, you have to teach other nurses what you're doing because your patients have 30% better life outcome. And I was an OB nurse, right? So I'm like, the first thing that came to mind that I said to her is, she said, what are you doing? I said, everything opposite you taught me as far as communication. I don't have any boundaries. I let my body be my boundary. But if I experience something that a patient can learn from and they can feel, you got to think, when you're a child and you go through that, your level of trust for adults is not exactly there, right?
Yeah, right.
So one of the most telltale signs when I was trying to start a business was I would ask women who I said I supported them, and I said, what did I do for you? And it was like, you taught me to love and trust myself. And I said, can you tell me how I did that? Because that was not my intention. And they're like, well, you were my friend, you were my parent, you were my counselor, you were my, but I was a human being. That's it.
Right. That's it.
I've had such a hard time thinking label, because I finally realized a couple of years ago, my own self-worth has nothing to do with what I do. It's it's my being. Now, if I try to make a profit of it, I can't turn myself off and on. It's who I am, and it's who I am. It's who we all are beneath the armor. Like, I just happen to be blessed with a traumatic brain injury. So years ago, I couldn't do like the rest of the world. So I just had to be and follow my inner guidance. That was my secret. No support, no therapist, no one ever on my side. But I listened to my intuition, and instead of running from pain, I went, okay, come on, whatever, bring it on. There's a gift, there's a lesson in the pain. And I think that's the key, that when you learn to use your pain instead of it using you, you still struggle, but there isn't suffering. Like, life is about struggle. We're all, I mean, it's not easy, but it is simple. But we have to see ourselves, and so we can trust ourselves to keep ourselves safe. That way we, I don't know. But one of the things I got sidetracked was when I talked to women, not my patients, but in the past few years when people would refer, and I didn't charge them, I just did kind of pro bono. They would make comments like, well, God, I've seen professionals for decades. You help me way more than the professionals. So I'd say, like, do you mind me asking, do you not see me as a professional? And this is the answer I got from everyone. You're my friend. Because, and I'd say, why? Well, I trust you. I thought that is such a sad thing that.
Whoops. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened to her.
I don't know.
We got about 12 minutes. Because she shouldn't have timed out now. She'll be back. I'll have to listen for her. I got to put it down here to see when she pops back in. Anyway, I need to say thank you for sure right now, but I've got some more questions here, obviously, from your other. And one of the best people, oh, there she is.
Okay, sorry, I called. Well, I was going to say, it was kind of sad because when people kept saying that to me, I'm like, okay, so we don't trust professionals then. I mean, if you had to make a blanket statement from that doesn't, sorry, people keep texting. I turn on airplane mode.
I don't know what happened to you, but you disappeared again.
I know.
There you go.
I forgot to turn myself on airplane mode. So texts are coming in and it cuts me off.
Oh,
But I think that the general consensus is a lack of trust.
absolutely. I totally agree with that. Being a lack of trust is one of our biggest problems.
And the only way, though, people would trust us is if we trust.
Trust them. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Your voice is gone. She's just gone. Anyways, she has real problems with technology over there.
Okay.
Anyways, I started to say, what are the best principles and practice for breaking the cycle of abuse and violence? Is it too late, or is there hope?
I'm sorry, one of the what?
What are the dynamics of dysfunctional families that have been, no, that's not it. What are the best principles and practice for breaking the cycle of abuse and violence? Is it too late, or is there hope?
Well, I don't think it's too late, but I do think we have a lot of work to do because I think there is a lot of violence, and I think there's a lot of condoning of violence on a local level and on a national and international level, which really makes it acceptable. I think some of the role models that young people are getting from people in power and in, on all levels of authority are very detrimental. And so I think we have to really inform people about what the effects are of untreated violence. People who suffer violence become symptomatic, and as we were saying, often they become passive and helpless because they were overpowered, or they identify with the aggressor. And if we don't stop that cycle by intervening, by really helping people heal their wounds, because when people have a chance to heal what happened to them, they don't repeat the cycle of abuse. I've never worked with anyone in all my years who had a chance to really go into the wounds that they received in their childhood or in the relationship they have now, who could find that inner essence in themselves, feel cared for, feel like an equal, feel mirrored, feel respected, have a safe place to share it all, who became a less loving person. I've never seen that happen.
No.
I've seen people become more loving toward themselves, kinder to the people around them, more willing and wanting to make a contribution in whatever circles they're in their lives. So I think we have to know that, bottom line is healing the wounded part of ourselves.
Right. I totally agree. The wounded part of ourselves is what's causing the problems.
Right. And we know that in our own relationships, right?
Yeah.
How many times have you been irritated or angry or walled off or, non-communicative because your own pain got activated?
Yep. I can remember that in my marriage and a few of my relationships afterwards.
Of course.
So
And really what I think the general population doesn't understand, to the extent that we focus on our families and help families with resources, with therapy, with all the things that families need not to feel so stressed out and visit their stress on their children and their spouses, it serves all of us. We're all safer in a world where every other people are safe. And one of the things that I saw that kind of backs that up from my experience as a therapist is that some of the people that I worked with weren't actually abused themselves. They weren't beaten. They weren't sexually assaulted in their families. They weren't screamed at, but other people were. Other people were targeted in their family. Maybe it was their mother or their sister or their brother or someone close. And just witnessing abuse that's not stopped is also a form of trauma.
yes.
So in our society, we're witnessing the abuse and harm done to many, many people around us. And even if we're not the overt victims of that, we're still really affected by our own helplessness often to help other people.
Yeah.
So we're all in this mental health boat together, is what I would say.
I totally agree with your statement. We've got about 6 minutes left. And I was going to say, a couple of weeks ago, I did a podcast alone for this time slot. And I talked about trauma and how the causes and the results and what to do about it and how it affects us and stuff like that. And one of the things I said, just being a witness.
That's right.
You know,
Sometimes everybody else's trauma can cause trauma for us. And I stress that.
Right.
Most
How many
people
of us
don't
are
do that,
traumatized by seeing these pictures of wounded babies in Gaza? We're traumatized by it.
yes.
yeah, I mean, the effects of the last few years, every single one of us has trauma now.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, there's,
Totally agree with you.
and
Simple.
we are at a critical point in humanity where we have two choices. I mean, we can continue the beaten path and just crumble and
Right.
lose what we have left as far as our individuality, our freedom and choice. And or we can change things up now and start talking and saying what's in our hearts, even though it may be scary. People may not like what we say. You know, there's a way of speaking your truth without offending and getting violent and getting angry. I mean,
I think
you know,
that's why.
disagree.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think that's one of the reasons why psychology is so important today and the whole model of psychotherapy, because when people who are conflictual, for instance, come to therapy, we don't feed the conflict. We help people hear each other. We help them talk safely. We help them listen the way that they want to be heard. And that's part of what helps resolve the conflict. The goal is to resolve the conflict and come back into cooperation and care and community and belonging and love. And if we brought those principles, if we had facilitators in the highest reaches of our institutional life, including government, who were helping people bridge their divides and listen deeply, we would be on a whole other page in our country and in our world.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Totally agree. I was going to say something. I'll be done if I remember what it is.
Because that's a career I think I could very naturally do.
Yeah, you probably could.
A communication facilitator?
Mm-hmm.
Facilitating.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. There's
And really big.
Think about that. So we need to talk about that.
yeah.
I'll be back when we get finished. We got about 3 minutes left. Is there anything you need to say, Phyllis? That you think
Well,
you've got
I
to
just
say?
really appreciate.
Where can people hire you? Where can they go?
The best place to reach me is on my website, which is my name, www.phyllisleavitt.com. And that's, you can spell my name, people's name, you know, my given names different ways. So it's PhyllisLeavitt. And my book is available from major booksellers, America in Therapy. And, you can contact me on my website, but I'm also on LinkedIn. You can contact me there, on Facebook or YouTube. I have a YouTube channel where I have lots of interviews up. I have blogs on my website and interviews on my website. I'm on Instagram, and I'm on Substack. I've written a lot of articles, and if you sign up for my newsletter, I just put out a free PDF, which is called "The 6 Secrets to Repairing Relationship: How to Reconnect After Conflict." And you're welcome to, make that available to yourself. I wrote it in a way that is really accessible to anybody. It's very personable. It's not teachy. It's not preachy. It just comes out of my own experience as a person in relationship, and obviously also as a therapist. So I'm totally happy to connect with anyone who would like to get in touch.
Thank you so much, Phyllis. Thanks for an engaging, great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Phyllis, and I appreciate you coming back after the technical issues last time. I appreciate it so much. I've had other guests who wouldn't do it, but you did. That shows your courage and commitment to your goal in life. I want to thank you again, and I'll have this up by the end of the week, I think.
Great.
Don't hold me to it, but it'll be up pretty soon.
thank you for your courage and commitment, both of you, because I know you're working really hard to make this a better world for people. And I think that's, what we're here to do.
All right. Thank you
All
very much.
Thank you.
Bye
Bye.
bye. Enjoy.
Bye. You too. All right.
I
Thank
asked her not to leave, so first thing she does is leave.
I'm
Anyway,
sorry.
I'm just talking to myself.
Oh, okay.
But thank you very much for being here, and I will talk to you later.
Great. You take
Okay.
care. Be well.
I
And I
will.
hope your shoulder gets better really soon.
All right. Thank you. Talk to you
Okay.
later.
Bye.
Bye.